Hello everyone, the Instant Camera Guy here, and welcome to a video that a few of you have been requesting for quite some time, and that is a video all about the MiNT Flashbar. I've demonstrated this in previous videos in the past, but I wanted to dedicate a video to it. And in particular because MiNT was kind enough to reach out and send me the Flashbar Gen 2.0. They saw the last video that I did on the I-type battery adapter that MiNT produce and said, hey, we noticed that you're using the old Generation 1 Flashbar. Would you like a new one? And I said, of course, and that I would do a bit of a comparison video talking about the features of both. Because I've been meaning to cover the Flashbar for ages, and the truth of the matter is the Model 1 is no longer available, only the Model 2 is, at least at the time of me recording this video. And so I was actually going to purchase one of the Model 2s anyway, but since MiNT reached out and gave it to me, I figured, well, what better time than now to do such a video? So on that note, I am going to put up in the little corner up here somewhere that I guess you could consider this video technically some kind of paid promotion. MiNT have not given me any money to do this video. They simply just sent the product along, of which I already kind of owned the first version anyway. And so the review and the discussion that you're going to hear me have on the Flashbar by no means, way, shape, or form has been influenced by the fact that I've been given one of these for free, but I wanted to just put that out there just to be as transparent as possible because I think that's really important to do if you're reviewing products. So it has been given to me. I am allowed to keep this, but at no stage did they tell me what to say, provide any scripting, or actually really even ask me to do a video on it. I just offered to them after they offered to give one to me. So they actually said, hey, would you like one? I said yes, and then I said, well, maybe I'll make a video on it. Anyway, this video is going to comprise of a few little parts. The first, I want to talk about the Flashbar itself, what it does, why you should absolutely own one if you have a Polaroid SX-70. It is also going to be part unboxing because this is the first time that I've opened this. I have not unwrapped it at all other than taken it out of the box that they sent it in. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is I want to dive deep into how the flash actually works on an SX-70. In particular, how the camera knows what aperture to select during a flash exposure. Because it is one of the most, I guess, unknown areas of SX-70 functionality. If you go online and browse Reddit and online on the forums, most people have no clue of how it works. You'll hear people kind of describe how it works, but it's like only half true or not all the information is there. So I really want to give a detailed description of how the aperture and how the flash system completely works on an SX-70 because I think it's super important to know. And the last thing I wanted to, well, the main reason that I want to discuss that part, so as well as discussing about the Flashbar, doing a bit of an unboxing, discussing the features between the two, I wanted to talk about how the flash aperture system works in an SX-70 because it is often something that technicians miss or something that goes out of calibration on its own, and it is responsible for flash photos being incorrectly exposed. And one of the main areas of criticism that you'll see levied against the MiNT Flashbar is if you go on Reddit or you go on some of the Facebook forums, people will say, the Flashbar is very underpowered. It's not powerful enough. And that's absolutely not true. It's not true at all. People that are having exposure issues with a MiNT Flashbar are generally because their camera hasn't been serviced or because that flash fire assembly in the camera and the cam follower assembly that controls the aperture has not been serviced properly. But I digress. Let's talk about the bar itself. The MiNT Flashbar is basically an electronic version of the classic 10 bulb flash that came out with the SX-70. The original SX-70 used 5 magnesium flash bulbs, all lined up one next to one another, and then if you flipped the bar around, it was the same on the other side. And there was a little PCB connector, and basically the way that those old flash bulbs would work is, and obviously I don't have a classic flash bar, I should have thought further ahead in terms of the video, but I'll try and pop some photos up so you can see what I'm talking about. You can actually see it in action in the original SX-70 promotional video if you want to watch further. But basically, when the camera fires its flash, a little electrical signal goes up into the socket, and that signal is basically, well, that electrical voltage is designed to burn the magnesium flash bulbs. The way an electronic flash works is an optocoupler basically converts that electrical voltage into an on-off sort of mechanical switch, which triggers the electronic flash. So it's basically an electronic version of what the flash bulbs were doing. They behave a little bit differently. A classic magnesium flash bulb fires a very, very bright burst of light over quite a slow duration. A magnesium flash bulb burns over about 1/30th of a second. An electronic flash will burn at the rate of around 1/1000th to 1/3000th of a second. So it's a very, very fast pulse of light. The way that it works, it takes 2 AAA batteries, which just go into the camera like so. You put the little battery door back on, and the camera has 2 settings. So you've got off. This half power setting is for 600 film, and if you put it all the way over to the side, that would be for SX-70 film. Because the flash is only powered by AAA batteries, it does take a little bit of time to charge, which is one of the main criticism points of the electronic flash. But to be honest, it doesn't really take that long. I mean, it's realistically no longer than like a Polaroid 600 takes to charge. So I'm not sure if people are like comparing this flash with like some kind of Canon speedlight or something like that, or some kind of really high-end studio strobe, but I think the charging time is totally fine. On the original classic MiNT Flash, which by the way I've had for a good decade or so, you can tell it's old because it's Impossible Project branded. It's got a little test button here which will fire the flash when you press it. And on the classic flash, the charging light is green and the ready light is blue. And I believe that on later versions of the Flashbar, so the 2.0, they swapped those LED colors around. Just as a little side, I don't like blue LED lights usually. Blue LED lights, because they were invented very, very late in the game, which I highly recommend, by the way. If you ever want a fascinating history, look at just how difficult the history of making blue LED lights was. You won't find them on vintage electronics. You'll only find them on things produced sort of after the year 2000. So whenever I see a blue LED light on a product designed for something vintage, it's a little bit anachronistic, which I guess some people could see as cool. Personally, it irks me, but whatever. It's just an LED. I personally, if I was to have designed this flash, would have used the same LED light indicators that Polaroid used. Red for charging and green for fully charged, just like on a Polaroid 600. But yeah, other than that, the first generation Flashbar is very, very easy to use. Once the flash is turned on, you simply plug it into the camera and away you go. Hit the button, and basically when the flash is inserted, the camera will pick up on that because these first 2 terminals on the little PCB here, they are linked together. And if you bridge those 2 terminals in the flash socket, it basically acts as a switch, and that tells the camera's PCB a flash has been inserted. It's time to, instead of using the electric eye to control the exposure, it's time to use the cam follower assembly and change the aperture to dictate exposure. And the closer you focus, the smaller the aperture is going to be. The further away you focus, the wider the aperture is going to be. So if you're shooting at infinity, it's going to be wide open at f8. And if you come all the way forwards, the aperture is going to stop down really, really, really small to something crazy like f32 or f64, something like that. It'll be really, really tiny so as to accommodate for that 10-inch close distance. But yeah, I mean, there's not really much more to say about the Flash version 1.0. So let's have a look at the updated version, the 2.0, which I'm unboxing for the first time. How lovely that MiNT supply batteries. Look at that. And they're real batteries too. These are Energizer brand. They didn't even go for the no-name random Chinese batteries. This is quality MiNT. This is how you make a product. Very nice packaging too. You know, nice steady cardboard. Nothing crazy fancy, but I like it. We have scanned this before using a product. So obviously there's no user manual. This will obviously take you to the website where you can download the manual. But the Generation 2.0 is physically the same size as the 1.0. I will say it's made of a slightly different plastic. The finish is like a lot shinier. In my opinion, I think the Flashbar 2.0 feels a bit cheaper. It's just something that I've noticed. I think the quality of the plastic on the first generation Flashbar is much nicer. I've seen and used other version 2.0 flashes in the past, and I've always found that to be the case, and that is still definitely the case. But otherwise, it works exactly like normal. So the battery compartment is on the other, no, it's on the same side. The battery compartment is being held in place by the little QR code sticker here. So I'll just remove that, and that gives us access to the battery compartment again. I'm going to grab a set of my own batteries. These are rechargeable Kratax batteries. I'll go into these in just a second, but I will try and load it up here. So like so, and get in there. What's going on here? I think the spring is, there we go. The spring's just very powerful. You got to push down. And let's turn it on. Actually, my batteries might be flat. Let's try another set, or make sure I've just got them in the right way. Yeah, I think so. Let's just try another set of batteries. Here we go. And let's just try that again. Those other ones might be out of charge. There we go. Yeah, okay. And as expected, as I'd anticipated, the blue charging light is now, the blue LED is now the charging light, and it'll be green when it's ready. The version 1.0 was completely the opposite. So I'm just waiting for it to charge. Any minute. There we go. So yeah, it seems that the version 2 might take a little bit longer to charge than the version 1. I'm not sure why that would be, but it does work. Now, one of the advantages to the version 2 is you do get a 2.5mm jack on the side. And you can plug in any kind of Studio Strobe PC Sync accessories, and it will fire the Studio Strobe, I believe, at the same time as the flash. But if you want to trigger external strobes, this is a good way of doing it. Now, it could just be that for the first charge, it needed a little bit of extra time. It certainly seems to be a little bit quicker now. But otherwise, it will work exactly the same way. I'll plug it in. There we go. Works like an absolute charm. But yeah, my dog's just barking at the mailman. The Flashbar works exactly as advertised. It is a flash for Polaroid SX-70s, and it's compatible with SX-70 or 600 film, depending on the mode you put it in. There's not really a lot extra for me to say, other than it's a great little tool. It does its job. With that said, I think there are a few things that MiNT could improve. One of the things that MiNT did is include the addition of magnetic filters, which is really novel. I always like anything that's held in place with magnets. I just think that is such a cool way to put a filter on a product, or attach an attachment to a product is doing it with little neodymium magnets. And they give you that sort of fluoro green and fluoro pink filter. Why they chose those colors, I'm not really sure. Because I don't think I've ever taken a photo where I've gone, yeah, I'd love for this to be fluoro green, but it's nice that they include them. I would like to see MiNT offer more filter options for the flash though. Or perhaps some kind of universal gel holder accessory that you could magnetize to the front of the flash in order to put your own filters in. I think that would be a nice touch. It seems like a feature that's underutilized. It seems kind of like they thought that it would be a really novel idea and then just kind of never really implemented it beyond that. I know that MiNT do like a filter kit that clips onto the front of the camera, but I'm not aware of them selling, and I could be wrong. If I am wrong, I'm going to flash it up on the screen right now and show you guys the extra products that you can buy, but I don't believe they exist. And I think it would be nice to magnetize different filters or more filters on the front of the flash unit. So I would like to see that in the version 3.0 if we ever get one. The other thing that I would like to see changed is the naming system for this half power, full power thing. Because in my opinion, it's the biggest flaw of this flash, because MiNT, and seriously, please, I really hope that you're watching this, and I hope that you take this advice under your wing. But no one understands this. The amount of clients that I have contact me confused about what the switches mean is insane. Nobody understands this. No one knows what to set their camera to. They go, oh, half power, full power, what do I do? It confuses every single user. I'm not sure why you don't just label it off .600 SX-70, right? Label it that, please. Because the half power thing is just confusing. Especially because if you know anything about, about film ISO, you'll know that this technically isn't half power anyway. It's actually 1/4 power. Because 600 film is for 600 ISO. 640 ISO. So 600 film is 640 ISO. SX-70 film is 160 ISO. So it's 1/4 the ISO, and it needs 1/4 the flash power. So you've got full power, technically quarter power, and then off. But if it was up to me, I would just label it off SX-70 600, because even if you labeled it quarter power, full power, whatever, no one understands what setting corresponds with what film. Just write the type of film on the flash. Make it easier for people to understand. I don't understand why you've gone for this weird little pictorial diagram. It wouldn't have cost you any more money to write like larger letters or block text or something like that. I just don't understand it. It's really weird. It's a baffling design decision. It's not true at the best of times because they haven't even used the right symbol to dictate quarter power. I don't know why they did it. Another criticism that I have of the Flashbar is that, and actually one of the biggest criticisms that you'll see online, is that it chews through batteries. And I actually do find that to be the case. At idle, turned off, there appears to be some kind of drain on the batteries due to the circuitry inside the camera. Now, I've obviously only just got the MiNT Flashbar 2.0, but that is certainly the case for the MiNT Flashbar Generation 1. If I leave this turned off and I go back to it after about a month, the batteries will be completely flat. I recommend remove the batteries from the flash and store it without the batteries in it if you are planning on, not wasting your batteries. I would do the same for the 2.0. As far as I know, this also chews through the batteries, from what I've been told. Certainly from what you read online, people criticize it of being a bit of a battery power hog, and I believe that's the case. I don't know why that's the case, but clearly there's some kind of intelligent circuitry that exists inside the PCB that is like regulating voltage or short circuit protection, something like that. It's probably some kind of short circuit protection that requires a constant like standby voltage in order to work. And if you leave them inside the flash, it completely it will completely drain the batteries. It's not such a big deal. Like I said, I just learned to store it. If I know I'm not going to be using it regularly, I just take the door off, store it to the side, and keep my batteries separate. But on that subject as well, I think I would much prefer if this battery door was captive, so you couldn't lose it, right? Because in its current design, you can remove it and you could accidentally lose that. And if you do, you're going to need to contact MiNT, who will supply you with a new one. The 2.0 does seem to have a battery door that's a little bit harder to click into place, although I must say that after a little bit of use, it seems to be loosening up. So it's probably just because it's a brand new product type of thing. Like, it just needs a bit of breaking in, because I'm now no longer having any trouble with it. I would probably say that the battery terminals that sit at the bottom just needed to be forced down for a little bit, because they would push too far up from the factory. But yeah, now that I've actually done this a few times, it's clicking in place just fine and equally as satisfying as the version number 1. But yeah, I guess those are my only real 2 criticisms with it. And once you understand what those symbols mean, I mean, look, honestly, if you were to read the manual that, the QR code directs you to, you might have a better understanding of how it works. But this product should be so simple as to not need a manual. And the way that you make it that simple is you just label what stuff does. Off, 600, SX-70, test. That's it. You should be able to figure it out. I mean, there's only 2 switches on this thing, right? But yeah, I personally get asked all the time. I'm sure someone's going to ask in the comments, even though I've explained it at great length. Someone's going to be, Jake, I'm using SX-70 film. What power do you reckon? Someone's going to do it for sure, because no one understands how any of these symbols work. So I would love to see that in version 3.0 labeled correctly. And I would like to see the off switch completely cut the trace from the batteries, because it does seem to drain. Like I said, I don't know if the version 2.0 does it. It's not a huge deal. Just leave it in your bag without the batteries in, and only put them in when you want to use it. Otherwise, works totally fine. It exposes totally fine. It does what it should. It's super powerful. I found it to be super reliable. Mine is still working after like a good 10 years of the version 1.0. It's never let me down. It's just a really good product, and I'd like to thank MiNT again for sending me the version 2.0. As far as I understand, the actual flash electronics and the output and that kind of stuff are identical in between the models. MiNT did appear to slightly alter the way that these get triggered though. Because if you guys are regular viewers of the channel, you'll know that recently I discovered a very obscure problem where if you used the MiNT Flashbar 1.0 with a very specific and relatively rare SX-70 model that had a very specific PCB, the version 1.0 would not trigger properly. And I later had it confirmed that it does trigger properly on the 2.0. So they fixed that issue. So this will now trigger 100% on any SX-70. This one, it is a rare variant, but if you have a 1976 model with the 6th flash inhibit PCB, this one will not work. Now, the last criticism I hear about the flash, I'm actually here to debunk, and I'm going to go into that in a bit of detail very soon, but I see all kinds of people on Reddit and stuff, and like if you search this on Google, it's pretty common. You'll get a lot of people say that the MiNT Flashbar is underpowered. They'll say, oh, it's not powerful enough. My photos are really dark. That's not the flash doing that, very likely, like unless you genuinely happened to get a dud product, but I doubt that that's the case. It is either user error, because you've used the camera on the wrong setting, because to be honest, the settings are confusing, like I just discussed, or it is because your camera's flash cam follower assembly isn't calibrated properly. And it's a recurring theme on this channel that if you do not have a serviced camera, you cannot expect things to work properly, and you probably are asking for trouble. I've drilled it in multiple times that SX-70s are very problematic cameras for a whole bunch of different reasons, through wear and tear, design flaws from the factory, and in later models, cost reduction. And people often miss or poorly calibrate, forget about the flash cam follower assembly, or it can just drift on its own over time and need recalibrating. So if you're getting really wacky exposures on your MiNT Flashbar, it might be worth looking into seeing whether it's a problem. So I'm going to cut the video here and then discuss in depth all about the flash cam follower assembly so that you guys can learn something. That's really all I wanted to say on the subject of the MiNT Flashbars. They're really great. Oh, and one thing that I will add, the way that it works, there's not like one large capacitor in here. There's a bank of several smaller capacitors. And I believe that what happens is when you put it on the quarter power setting, you are only charging a few of those capacitors instead of the entire bank, and that's how it reduces the power. I believe that's how it works. All right, on to the cam follower assembly. I mentioned before that I use rechargeable batteries. I've spoken about these on the channel before, but these are Kratax branded rechargeable lithium-ion AAA batteries. Effectively, the way that they work is there is a tiny lithium cell in here and then a teeny tiny little buck converter chip at the surface of the cell here, which basically converts the sort of 3.7 volts that are inside this thing down to a rock solid 1.5 volts. So basically they've got their own tiny little DC to DC converter in there. You right there, Luna? It's just my dog. Yeah, they've got their own little DC to DC converter, and yeah, these are really handy to have. They come with a little charger, which you use like so, and you just plug it in to USB, and it'll charge the batteries. Super handy for things like photographic flashes, which tend to chew through batteries at the best of times. These are single-handedly one of the best investments you can ever make. I use them in basically everything. I use the AA version in my DSLR that I use to take product photos. Again, made by Kratax, and they are just super, super handy. Once you've got a set, you basically never have to buy regular AAAs or AAs ever again. So yeah, I use these in conjunction with the MiNT Flashbar all the time, because that way, if I do leave batteries in or I leave the flash turned on and they end up drained, it doesn't matter. I can simply just recharge them and use them again. So, one of the main criticisms of the SX-70 Flashbar that you'll see online is people claiming that the flash is somehow underpowered. Well, one of these is from an SLR680 and the other is from a MiNT Flashbar. I'm not going to tell you which one is which, but they're exposed basically the same. The MiNT Flashbar is not underpowered, but a common issue exists in the camera's flash assembly that can make it seem underpowered. But this would go for any flash that you insert into the camera that was electronic in nature. See, Polaroid did used to make electronic flashes back in the day, such as this Polatronic. As I was saying in the previous part of the video, the main difference between a old school flash bulb and an electronic flash is an old school flash bulb produces light by literally burning magnesium filament. Because it's something literally catching fire and emitting light, the actual peak brightness happens after a duration of around 1/30th of a second. So the actual flash bulb burns for a much longer time than the flash of light from the xenon tube. So an electronic flash works differently. Nothing is burning. There's a xenon tube in here, like a light bulb basically, and electricity from the form of AA or AAA batteries, or whatever type of battery the flash uses, basically gets converted through a transformer into a high voltage, which gets stored in a large capacitor, and that all gets released upon the flash being triggered in the form of a bright flash of light. So it sends that high voltage through the xenon tube, which over the duration of around 1/1000th of a second, I mean, you can get them faster, but it's usually around 1,000, 1/3000th of a second, something like that, produces a very bright pop of light, like so, right? Probably too fast for a camera to truly pick up, like my little, the camera I'm filming this with, but that is how they work. And because of that long burn duration, a poorly calibrated cam follower assembly, which I'll show you in a second, isn't particularly a problem. But it becomes a problem on electronic flashes, which have a much shorter duration. And I think to fully understand that, you guys are going to need to pay some attention here. And what I have here is an SX-70 shutter from a Model 2. And it doesn't matter what shutter we're talking about here, whether it's an SX-70 Model 1, Model 2, Alpha, Sonar, SLR 680. The way that the flash aperture system works is the same across all models. It works identically. So if we peel back the layers here, okay, we have the focusing wheel on the side here. Let's just get a bit of extra light here, get the camera to focus. I'll put my little white card under there so that you guys can see the aperture. And first, let me just explain how the SX-70 works during a regular exposure. So I'm going to put that to the side. And here I have a shutter that's even more stripped back. So half the lens is missing, the main shutter solenoid is missing, and this allows me to easily move the blades. So the SX-70 blades look a little like this, okay? It's a sliding blade that moves side to side, and it's got two holes. The large hole in the center is for the lens, and this kind of pyramid-shaped, triangle, arrow-shaped hole, that is for the electric eye. And what happens is when the blades slide past one another, the eye and the lens produce different shapes of apertures based on how far those blades have moved. And this happens not only in the lens, but at the electric eye as well. See that? So what happens? The SX-70 is an SLR, right? So the lens is open while you're looking through the viewfinder. When you press that shutter button, the first thing happens, the blades close. The engine turns, the mirror flips up inside the camera, and now the camera is ready to receive light from the lens, bounce it off the mirror inside and onto your film. So play along at home. So viewfinder, lens is open, you take a photo, the shutter closes, and then what starts to happen is a spring on the solenoid that goes off to the side here, right? So the solenoid is that red and copper looking thing. Electricity closes the shutter, so electricity causes the solenoid to plunge. And once the lens is completely closed, the mirror slaps up inside the camera. Electricity gets cut to the solenoid. And what happens is the spring starts to open up the blades. So you start to get light shining through the blades. So I'm demonstrating what's happening in slow motion, right? Until theoretically it could go all the way open. Now what happens is as those blades are opening, light is coming in through the lens, but also the electric eye. Now once the electric eye has received enough light information, the PCB, the brains of the camera go, ooh, that's enough light, close the shutter again. And so the solenoid becomes powered, the blades close, the camera continues its cycle, the mirror comes down, the film ejects, and once the film is totally ejected and the mirror is completely down, viewfinder opens up again. So the shutter blades open up again, the viewfinder you can now see through, and that is how it works. Okay? So for example, if you're taking an ambient exposure and it's got a lot of really bright sunlight, it'll do something like this. Close, you'll get a little pinhole of light like that, film will spit out, lens will open. If it's going to do a longer exposure, it might look something like this. Close, lens opens all the way, light hits the eye, yep, that's enough light, close, spit the film out, film is ejected, lens opens up again. That's how the SX-70 shutter works for ambient light. So, a normal photo. It works differently when you use the flash. So when you use the flash, let's go back to our other shutter here. And I'm just going to remove the focusing wheel here so we can see underneath it. When you use a flash, things are a little bit different. So when the flash goes off, it's a fixed power of light. Meaning this is always going to output the same level of power when the flash goes off, whether your subject is 10 feet away, 20 feet away, 2 feet away, or 10 inches away. And so you can't just have the blades opening and closing. You've got to have them make very specific apertures based on the distance that your subject is at. So if we go back to this shutter, if your subject is very close, it's going to make a really tiny aperture like that, because that's all you need, because your subject's only 10 inches away. If your subject is maybe 3 feet away or 1.5 meters away, it might open up like this. And if you're at infinity, it's going to open up all the way. And that would make sense, because the further away your subject is, the more that light from the flash unit needs to travel. And so the wider the aperture you're going to need to capture that light. So when you use flash on an SX-70, it is the distance from your subject that is going to change. And so the aperture has to reflect the distance of your subject. Small aperture if it's very close, wide aperture if you're very far away. So it doesn't use a traditional shutter speed system per se, it uses aperture. So underneath the focusing wheel, you've got this little thing. It's spring-loaded and it moves. So this is called the cam follower assembly. When you move the light dark wheel, this walking arm moves the cam follower assembly. See? And on the back of the focus wheel is this spiral groove. I don't know if that's going to really show up in the light. Hopefully you can see that. You see that spiral groove? So this little pin here, let's not lose that pin. This little pin here on the cam follower assembly connects into that spiral groove. So as you focus, as you turn the lens closer and closer and closer, it pushes the cam follower assembly over to the side. You guys see how that's working? So the cam follower assembly is physically moved by either the light dark wheel, the focus distance, or a combination of both. Okay? Now what's happening with that cam follower assembly, and I have one here. I should have one here. Actually, you know what? Let's just take off this one because I can show you guys. Let's just further disassemble this. So I'll take off the little washer that holds it in place. The way that this cam follower assembly works is it's got this little spring-loaded flap down the bottom. Can you see that little spring-loaded flap? It might be hard to see. Now that spring-loaded flap sits underneath this secondary solenoid. So you've got one solenoid. A solenoid, by the way, if you don't know, a solenoid is a type of electromagnet. So it is electromagnetic. It's an electromagnet. When you put electricity through this coil of wire, it plunges a cylinder. And when you cut the electricity, when you cut the power, a spring pushes the solenoid back. Well, this tiny little solenoid works the same way. It's either spring-loaded up in the air, or if you apply power to it, it shoots downwards. And when that solenoid shoots downwards, it pushes down on this little spring-loaded flap. Now, this spring-loaded flap is a stopper. What does it stop? Well, it stops the aperture blades at a certain distance. You see that little white scissoring arm here? Can you see that moving side to side? Maybe I'll show you on this shutter. You've got this arm that connects both blades. So both blades are connected by a pin to the scissoring arm. Okay? And there's this little sort of piece on the scissor arm that sticks upwards. Well, that piece sticks upwards so as to make contact with the little spring-loaded flap on the flash cam follower assembly. And so what that means is, depending on the position of the cam follower assembly, the aperture blades get stopped at a certain position. So what's going to happen is the following. And I'm going to use my screwdriver here as a stop instead of the cam follower assembly so that you can see what's happening. But I want you to imagine that my screwdriver here is the little spring-loaded flap. So what happens when you insert a flash bar into the camera? As I was saying earlier in the video, the first two pins on the flash bar are joined. So they're actually continuous with one another. And when you bridge the first two pins in the socket in the flash assembly, that tells the camera, ooh, a flash has been inserted. And so what that does, that changes the behavior of the PCB. It changes the behavior of the chips to do the following. Number one, it'll fire the shutter at a pretty fixed speed. Well, okay, there's an asterisk to that when we're talking about models of SX-70 that have fill flash, but let's say for the point of argument, because this is already a complex topic, it'll fire the camera at a fixed speed. So basically that speed is around 1/10 of a second, pretty much enough to open the blades all the way and close them, unless it gets stopped first. The second thing flash mode does is, during the exposure, it engages the secondary solenoid, which pushes down on the flap. Now, depending on what your wheel is focused to, what happens is this. So viewfinder is open. You take a photo. The blades close. Now it enters flash mode. Solenoid gets engaged. The arm goes down. The shutter blades move, but it gets blocked. And so you get this tiny or smaller aperture instead. Exposure is considered done. After a certain time is up, blades close. Do you see how that works? So because something is now physically blocking the aperture blades, it's changing the shape. So it's changing the maximum opening that the blades are allowed to use. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to reassemble. I'm going to reassemble this little flash cam follower onto this camera. And I'm going to show you guys in real time what happens if we engage the secondary solenoid. And I'm going to show you guys with the focus wheel on just how everything is working. Now, I am sorry if I'm losing you guys with how complex this is, but this is why I wanted to make this video, because no one knows how this thing actually works. And there's so much confusion. I see people, oh, what aperture does the flash fire at? What shutter speed does it fire at? Well, it doesn't really have one. It's all dependent on the distance. So yeah, this gets very complex. So hopefully I'm not losing anyone here. All right, so I have just put the focusing wheel back on. I've got my white card so that you can see what's happening through the lens. What I'm going to do here is just using a little spike tool, I'm going to engage the solenoid. Then with my thumb, I'm going to press down on the cam follower solenoid 2. So I'm going to press down on the secondary solenoid, and I'm going to let go. Now this has just engaged the secondary solenoid. Now look what happens as we focus closer. See that? The closer we focus, the smaller the aperture is getting. So all the way down to 10 inches. See that? Now watch happens when we hit the light dark wheel. See how everything changes? So that's how the exposure works. It all is based on the distance that you focus the camera to. The distance basically stops down that lever at a different distance. And depending on the distance of where that cam follower assembly is located, your aperture is going to change. And you can physically see, just behind the focus wheel, you'll probably be able to see that cam follower assembly moving. And the reason that it's moving is because of that spiral groove under the wheel. Okay? So that, in a nutshell, is how the flash aperture system works on an SX-70. I'm exhausted explaining this. If you don't understand how that works, I recommend you rewatch that video a few times until you do. So here's the rub. There's a little calibration screw at the top of the cam follower assembly. I'm going to get my lamp here because it might be hard to see. It's a tiny little plastic lug right in here. And you can, with a screwdriver, adjust that lug clockwise or counterclockwise. And what that's going to do is it's going to move this little plastic lug, which again controls the point at which the lever goes up and down. And since there's a curve on that little metallic lever that stops the aperture, basically there's two axes that affect the point in which the aperture blades stop. So that gives it a degree of adjustability. So if you adjust the little plastic cam in the cam follower assembly, you can widen the aperture or you can narrow the aperture. And there's the problem. Oftentimes, when clients get a camera, either through jostling around or defects from the factory or the previous technician hasn't bothered to check it, that cam follower assembly may not be adjusted correctly. For an electronic flash, the cam follower needs to produce an aperture shape that I like to call the aeroplane. It looks, and I'm going to try and zoom in, but it looks like this, right? On an SX-70 Alpha or Sonar or a Model 2 that has the style of blades with a slightly different shape, it looks kind of like a bow tie. That's the best way I can describe the aperture. On an SX-70 Model 1, I describe it as more of an aeroplane shape. right? It's kind of got like a bigger point in the center and then little wings off to the side. But that's basically the shape that you should be getting at 10 inches. So at the minimum distance, when your camera is on flash mode, you should be getting that kind of an aperture shape. Now what happens if that little cam follower assembly, if that little plastic lug is not calibrated properly, you might get an aperture that's too wide, or you might get one that's a tiny little pinhole, right? You might get one that's really, really tiny. And that's pretty common. When you have an aperture that's way too small, the flash is going to seem underpowered. It's going to seem like it's not letting enough light out, but it's not the problem of the flash. The flash is outputting the same power depending on what you set it to, quarter or full power. It's constant. If you set this to the half power setting here, true, the 1/4 power setting, this is always going to fire the same fixed output of light. So as far as your camera is concerned, it's always receiving a steady pulse of light that's always the same exposure. The difference comes from how much the aperture lets that light in. And on many early cameras, so SX-70 Model 1s with the chrome body, especially those cameras with Fairchild shutters, they are actually set up from factory to produce very teeny tiny apertures. Right? So instead of being that kind of aeroplane shape like that, they're really tiny. So I call it the small rectangle, right? So instead of being the little aeroplane, little bow tie shape, they are teeny. Now you'll find that on Fairchild cameras because when Fairchild cameras were invented in 1972, electronic flashes did not exist. Polatronic flashes did not exist. And when you had a flash bulb, the longer burn time, the 1/30th of a second burn time of that flash bulb meant that a smaller aperture, it didn't really matter as much. Like because of the extra length of time that the shutter was being held open for, it didn't matter so much. And early Fairchild shutters tend to hold the shutter open for slightly longer. During the flash exposure. So if you have a very, very early Model 1 with a Fairchild shutter, what you might notice during a flash exposure if you use electronic flash is if you're at 10 inches, it'll sort of like do a long exposure in the small aperture mode for quite a while until it takes the photo. And the reason for that is early model Fairchild shutters often used fill flash. I'm starting to get confusing here because now I've got to explain how fill flash works. And this is getting more and more complicated the more I talk about this, so please forgive me. So you remember before I said, well, it fires at a fixed aperture, it fires at a fixed shutter speed, so basically enough to go full and then close again. And then if it gets stopped earlier, then great. Well, that's only true unless the camera is using fill flash. So fill flash was present in early model Fairchilds, I believe. Then Polaroid decided, you know what, scrap fill flash. We ain't going to use fill flash. We'll just make it a fixed speed, keep it simpler. And then in alphas, they decided, you know what, we want fill flash to come back again. So the way that fill flash works is the electric eye and solenoid 2 are engaged at exactly the same time. And it becomes a case of what produces the correct exposure of light first. Is it the ambient exposure or will it hit the small aperture first? And basically what happens is, let's say you're focusing on a subject that's like 10 feet away, it's a bright sunny day, and you're using flash. Well, the flash for a subject that's very far away will need quite a wide aperture, right? So let's say your subject, if you're using purely flash, would need an aperture of this wide, right? But you're shooting on a sunny day. Well, that's going to result in a totally blown out photo. So if you have like an SX-70 Model 1 or a Model 2 that doesn't have fill flash, you're going to have a bad time. If you have an SX-70 Alpha though, or a sonar, or an SLR-680, which does have fill flash, the following is going to happen. So, lens is open, you take a photo, shutter closes. Solenoid 2 is engaged. What would normally happen is the shutter would open all the way, boom, hit the stop, done. But what's happening here, because the electric eye is engaged at the same time, the stopper comes down, but oh, that's enough light. It closes before it has a chance to reach the stopper. Does that make sense? So if you're shooting on a faraway subject with flash in light that would traditionally be more than what the flash aperture would expose for, it's actually going to close the blades before it gets to that stage. Does that make sense? I hope this is making sense. I really hate describing how the flash system works in an SX-70 because it is just bonkers complicated and no one seems to really understand it. And it's taken me like years of taking these things apart to understand it. But in a nutshell, that is how it works. So what I'm trying to say here is when you go online and people are complaining that their MiNT Flashbar photos are always overexposed or they're always underexposed, the first thing to ask is the flash cam assembly adjusted properly? Because it may be that a technician has forgotten to check it. It may be that the camera has simply developed a fault or the little plastic lug has like jiggled out of position, because it can happen. Or the actual metallic lever, so the actual little spring-loaded stopper may be faulty or it might be bent out of shape. Because in my experience, I would say that probably only like 50% of SX-70s that come my way have a cam follower assembly that actually works correctly. Now, this complete shutter that I just demonstrated, this one's actually calibrated right. So I'm very happy about that. If I stop it down, manually stop Sol 2, and I focus all the way close, it actually makes like the correct little airplane shape that it's supposed to. So I'm actually happy with that one. But a lot of times they don't. They're either going to be way too big or what's more common is that the aperture is way too small. And that is why people have trouble. Now, the reason that people claim the MiNT Flash is underpowered is because the MiNT Flash is currently the only flash on the market, although there may be others coming, hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, but it's the only flash in the market. So what are you going to compare it to? There's nothing. So people go to use the electronic flash because it's not set up properly, because the flash fires so quickly and the aperture isn't set up properly, it's too small, people will go, oh, the flash is underpowered, it's not working properly. Well, odds are it's not MiNT's fault. Odds are your camera just needs a service. And that's the truth of the matter. Now, when I overhaul a camera, I will generally test with flash every single one that I get. And I generally will test at a close focus distance. So this is my little He-Man figurine, Ram Man. He's been my buddy for many, many years now when it comes to testing cameras, because he's got some skin tones, he's got shiny stuff, he's got black boots, he's got a range of different colors that I can see are exposing correctly or not. And yeah, Ram Man helps me test out flash photos all the time. So the flash cam follower assembly is something that, like, as of 2021 or so, I check on every single client's camera because I know it's a big issue. I know it's often forgotten about. And I know that oftentimes when people go to take a flash photo, they think that their camera isn't working properly. But like I said, a lot of technicians, they can forget about it because, let's be honest, it's an easy thing to forget. I mean, I'm sure that there are some cameras that I've forgotten it on in the past, but I try and make a habit, because these days when I overhaul a client's camera, I send it back with example photos. I tend to try and include a flash photo in those examples as well. But yeah, it's something that's often missed. It's really misunderstood, and people don't understand how it works. But yeah, I think that's really as far in depth as I want to go into that. From a layman's perspective, you don't really need to know all that information of how it works. But if you've ever wanted a more in-depth explanation as to how the flash aperture system works in an SX-70, well, this is your video. I'm so sorry that it's been such a long video, but I feel like when it comes to flash, there is just so much stuff that you need to explain. But yeah, to summarize, the MiNT Flashbar is awesome. Yes, it has a few drawbacks, but honestly, at this price point, like these are only like 140 Australian dollars to buy brand spanking new. They are a bargain. They are compact, they do the job, and in my opinion, they are an essential purchase for anyone that wants to use them on, that wants to take flash photos with an SX-70 camera. In fact, if you add a flashbar to an SX-70 sonar, you basically end up with an SLR-680 in terms of functionality. And that is a video that I want to do in the future. Actually, I want to do a video comparing the MiNT Flash to the SLR-680 because there's often a big debate over which one is better. Actually, on that subject, just very briefly, I'll probably go into that more in the comparison video between the 680 and the MiNT Flashbar. But the 680 actually has a more powerful flash output than the SX-70 does. And that's because the SLR-680 is designed to use a very minuscule aperture. The actual aperture that an SLR-680 uses is very, very tiny compared to what an SX-70 sonar or alpha would use for the same flash distance. And that's by design. And that's because the flash capacitor value for most cameras outputting a flash for 600 film is about 200 microfarads. Whereas the SX-70, the SLR-680 has a capacitor of about 400 microfarads. So it's actually a capacitor that's twice as powerful, and as a result, it actually needs a much tinier aperture. So the SLR-680 does have one advantage in that, yes, the flash is technically more powerful, but it's not something you'd really notice because it's designed to use a smaller aperture to compensate, and so it's kind of moot anyway, but I will just throw that out there. Now, what can you do if you don't want to buy a MiNT Flashbar, but you do want something that's 600 film compatible? Well, you can upgrade any pre-existing flash to be compatible with 600 film. I've done videos on this in the past. You've got two options on how you can do it. You can either put ND filter material over the original lens to reduce the light output by 2 stops. So I think they call that ND4 material. So basically any kind of neutral density filter to go over the lens of the flash that's going to reduce the light output by 2 stops, or you can do a capacitor swap. The original capacitor in one of these flash units is about 1,000 microfarads to 800 microfarads. It depends on the specifics of the SX-70 flash. But if you swap it out to one that's about 200 microfarads, you will get a flash that not only charges in a quarter of the time, takes a quarter of the power, but has a quarter of the output. And that's actually what I've done here with this Polatronic. This Polatronic is modified for 600 film because I've swapped out the original capacitor. All right, well, I'm sure that's going to be the most confusing video that I've ever released. If you didn't understand what I was talking about, then that's fine. I barely understand it myself. But for real, if you didn't understand it, go back and re-watch it a few times. And maybe if you have like a broken SX-70, like pull it apart to see what I'm talking about, or download a copy of the repair manual so that you can understand how that system works with a bit more clarity. But yeah, I hope this video has been a little bit educational. I hope it's more information than you ever wanted to know, and I hope it wasn't too confusing. If you've stuck around in the video for this long, I salute you. Look at you. Go you for your ability to sit through long-form content. And yeah, my brain's cooked. Yours will probably be cooked too. So I'm going to say goodbye. I am still coming with my 2,000 subs video. I haven't forgotten, but I'm actually going away. I'm house sitting this weekend for a friend of mine, so I won't be able to make YouTube videos. So hopefully next weekend I'll be doing that. Have a wonderful audience, and I will see you next time. Oh, real quick, I know I'm going to get asked about this, but the SX-70R, so the manual control Bluetooth PCB, the dedicated dongle for that has external flash sync, and so you can fire studio strobes with it, and there is a manual aperture mode for the SX-70R. So I just wanted to describe how that works. Basically, it involves manually timing the shutter, so basically firing it like normal in order to get those different aperture shapes. But instead of doing it using solenoid 2, you manually time it. So, you either do a very fast exposure or a longer exposure. So it works the same way that the manual shutter speeds do, so the manual shutter speed selection. It's just that instead of giving you the effective shutter speed, it's going to give you the effective flash aperture as well. So it just manually times things instead of using the stopper. And so that means that the aperture will open up to whatever you want at whatever distance. It's not going to be based on distance. Unless you want it to be based on distance, because the SX-70R dongle does have a mode to engage the distance-based aperture, but it also has a mode that will disengage distance-based aperture and time it manually if you want, let's say, for example, a flash photo purely at f8. And on that subject, if you get the flash cam follower assembly, see that little flappy thing? If you remove that, if you rip that off and reinstall it back into the camera, you'll get a camera that will always fire the aperture at f8 regardless of distance. So this is called the f8 flash mod. It's quite popular for studio photographers to have their SX-70 f8 flash modified, because it means that they'll always know what aperture the camera will be firing at, and so the studio strobes become a little bit easier to plan for. So yeah, if in case you weren't already confused enough, there's a bit of extra information. SX-70R, the manual control PCB, does have options to either distance-based control the aperture like normal, or manually time the shutter so that the aperture makes different shapes. Or you can modify an SX-70, and I can modify it, like it's literally a free mod. I will do it for you for free if you want it, because it takes all of 2 seconds. I just remove the little flappy bit and boom, the camera will fire constantly wide open. That is all.